I'm welcoming Joseph Edwards, who's with his wife Lydia have planted a church up in Blaenau Ffestiniog called Craig Blaenau. Craig means rock, and so in Welsh. And Josh has got a real heart for the young generation. Let's just call it the under 25s for the moment. That makes it easier. And I've invited Jos to share with us not only what God is doing among the younger generation in Wales now, but actually to give us a little bit of a history as well, because Wales has got a little bit of a track record with regard to how God has used young people in the past in its history. And so I'm just going to ask Jos just to share a little bit about that, and then we'll go on to hear from him what God is doing now and how young people can respond to the call. So, Jos, welcome. Okay. I'm not going to ask you to introduce yourself because I've just done it for you.
Good job.
Yeah. And so let's just go straight in and tell and ask you to share a little bit about, some of the young people in the history of Christianity in Wales that God has used powerfully in the past. Can you do that and share with us as well about the recent event that you had the privilege of sort of leading for a day? Can you?
Yeah, I can definitely. Well, we hosted. I'm part of the under 25s team with Canty Gymru, which I know many of the people who've listened to your podcast will be familiar with. Ben Franks and Lewis, they're my brother and sister-in-law as well, and they just lead this fantastic movement really that's seeking to see 100 churches planted across Wales in the next 10 years. And we're seeing in that vision, central to it is the under 25s generation. And so part of that team, we gathered, we had an event called The Gathering, a Gymanfa, in Hirwaun, and we gathered over 60 young people into that space where we got to seek God together, to be inspired, to long for him to move in our land again. And I just shared, we were looking at the Great Commission. I shared on that just short refrain, therefore go. And we see it, don't we, in light of what Jesus has just said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations. And whilst I was preparing, now, I studied history at uni. I am no expert. I often say when I went to uni in Manchester that sadly I did a degree in rugby and did some history on the side. That's how it worked out for me. The desire to learn and to read more came later on really for me. And in my reading and understanding of Welsh church history, you do realise this track record. You see God has raised up young men and women in the past, and he's used them to quite literally transform nations. And so, I did a quick overview in my talk with the crew there, and amazingly, it seemed to land with many and resonate with them. So shall we just do a quick whistle-stop tour of some of those figures?
Please do. Yeah.
So we'll start with Robert Jermaine Thomas. Now, his story features in your podcast already, Gwynedd, with Joel Morris from Union. Right. So Joel's done a great job of telling the story there. But a few things that stood out to me about Robert Jermaine Thomas. Firstly, he was from Rhaeadr, which is a town in Powys in mid Wales. Small town that many people just drive through these days. But out of there, God raised up a warrior of a young man in Robert Jermaine Thomas. He was influenced by his father, who had grown up experiencing those early Methodist revivals here in Wales. And then he went to Bible college, and there he was influenced by a couple of friends who were going out as missionaries to China. And so in 1863, he graduated, he married, he got ordained, and was commissioned and sent to China as a missionary with his wife. Pretty significant year, if you ask me. But out there then,
1863, did you say?
1863, yes. big year for him. But out there then that he encounters tragedy. He loses his wife within 3 months of living out there in the mission field. But God works through all things, and somehow through that, then he ends up in a city. He moves from where they were, from the inland towards the harbour in Shefu, where the port is nearest to Korea. And there, many Christians had fled from Korea, from the persecution there. Only the year before, 8,000 Christians had been massacred out there. And as he met these Christians, as he heard their stories, God lit a fire in his heart that despite the danger, he had to go. He knew he had to go. And so he spent the next 3 years traveling back and forth via boats, smuggling Bibles and preaching the gospel as they docked in these various towns in Korea. And then in 1866, he was sent on a rescue mission. 2 missionaries had been caught out there and needed rescuing. And so they were sent. But sadly, the Korean government intercepted them and they ambushed the boat that they were on. But Robert Jermaine Thomas makes this point. He had a sack full of Bibles, and he wanted to make sure that before his life ended, that every single one of those Bibles had made it to a shore. So he starts throwing them off the boat. And then the soldier, pointing the sword at him, he insists, he pleads on him to take this Bible before he then kills him. And now the story, you'd think would end there, but it does not, because those people, either on the shore or that soldier as well, took these Bibles home. And wallpaper in Korea then was very rare and expensive. And so they made a point of plastering their walls with a paper from these Bibles. And now we know, don't we, Gwynedd, that the word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. And so people started reading the words on their walls, and they were converted, they came to faith, and revival broke out in Korea. And even now, to this day, we're here in Blaenau Ffestiniog, small town, many, overlook it, and yet I get to every month send prayer points to Sarang Church out in South Korea, who have a team of intercessors who pray 24/7 for Europe and for Wales. And I was sent a photo just the other day of their prayer room, and on the wall there are photos of churches, names of churches here in Wales, newly planted. Our name, Craig Blaenau, on their walls in South Korea, because of this young man. 26 he was when he died, 23 years old when he left for China. And because of his obedience and faith, we today get to enjoy such a rich partnership and fellowship with this church.
So amazing. And I was thinking, as you were sharing Robert Jermaine's story there about, on the shore where, the soldier was there with his priority continued to be sharing the gospel in the facing death, really. He didn't care about himself. But what would happen to him? That's powerful, isn't it?
What good it is. I'm reminded of Jesus' words, isn't it? What good is it for man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? That you're no fool, are you? That's what Jim Elliot said on the mission field, isn't it? You're no fool if you give, and even your own life, what you cannot keep, to gain that which you cannot lose. That's what he did.
So tell us about Rosina Davis.
Rosina Davis. Again, I'm no expert. Jonathan Thomas, who's been on the podcast as well, Gwynedd, he's the expert. He's done a lecture on this, actually. That's on YouTube. So if you want to check it out, it's so worth it.
Well, let's what I'm going to do then, Jos, I will point people in that direction, Rosina Davis. I'll point them to Jonathan Thomas's video. Okay. And is that going to be okay?
Yeah, that's great. All you need to know about her then is she was 14, 15 years old, evangelizing to miners in South Wales and seeing God do phenomenal things through her. And she was the spark that lit the flame of revival here in North Wales. So, well, a pattern that I saw just in reading about these figures in Welsh church history was, as I noted, with Rhaeadr, and that was where Jermaine Thomas was from. Rosina Davis was the same. Treherbert in South Wales, mining town, not the cultural centres of the world, you'd say, and yet God was raising up mighty men and women for the gospel from these places. And now Anne Griffiths, she's from the most rural and small of places. She's a farm girl. Dolwar Fach is where she was raised, and she over the Berwyn Mountains in kind of mid Wales there. Again, you'll have to get a map up to properly find it.
Okay, Dolwar Fach. That's a familiar name, but I couldn't tell you where it was. Okay.
Yeah. So she, as I said, was a farming girl, young and very poor, as many were in rural Wales. But she grew up, and she would make a point every Sunday to travel. They would walk the 20-mile journey. People walked more then anyway, but she would walk over the Berwyn Mountains down to Bala, just so that she could listen to the famous Thomas Charles of Bala preach. And as she would do that, as it was her custom, and as she was discipled by Thomas Charles, really, a passion for the Bible was just lit in her, and a desire not just to know the Bible, but to experience the Bible as well. I think that's the significant thing about Anne Griffiths, is that she realised that the Bible is a gateway almost. It's the menu that points you to the food that you can then experience. And so she starts writing poetry, hymns. Now, she only wrote them out of the overflow of devotion and encounter that she would have in Dolwar Fach, in her farm. But she would have these spiritual experiences that were so deep. Sometimes she would be left just laying on the floor, the Holy Spirit just laying her on the floor, and for hours just sat there kind of overwhelmed by the presence of God. Or sometimes just spent hours just in reflection, just blown away by the richness of the gospel. And she died young. She was 29 years old when she died, but throughout her life she was writing this poetry, these hymns, and these 30 hymns were collected and published by no other than Thomas Charles himself, who read her words and realized this is a hymn book for revival that she's written. And it showed that despite being poor, uneducated and young, she had mined the depths of God and the gospel that very few have. And Charles was like, Wales needs to know about this young woman, Anne Griffiths. So she's extraordinary to have done that. And she had no idea. She's now in the great cloud of witnesses, and she might be looking down and cheering on, but when she was writing these words, they were purely out of devotion and overflow rather than for the nation itself.
It's not an exaggeration to say how significant Anne Griffiths is to Welsh language Christianity, really. And I suppose it's difficult for those who haven't come across her work to really appreciate the richness of what she's written. But as to Welshmen who have grown up, singing these hymns, and not so much now probably, but though some are still being sung, definitely in the churches, obviously, but within our own context. The significance of the work that she did in such a short period is amazing. And we treasure them as Welsh Christians, really, don't we? And then there's another one, D.E. Jones. Tell us briefly about D.E. Jones, because there's a little bit of a personal connection
There is, yeah. So Llandderfel, near Bala, small village again, and he was a young man who he'd just been through Bible college with the Calvinistic Methodists, and he reads in their paper, a Goleuad, of an advert asking for young ministers to be sent to northeast India, to this remote rural area of India called, well, it's now called Mizoram. At the time, it was the Lushai Hills, and it spoke of a people, a tribal people, the Mizos, who were headhunters before. And had never heard the gospel, and there was need. There'd been a couple of Scottish missionaries out there, and there was a need then for others to take the work forward. And so I love this about D. Jones. He turns up at the General Assembly, and he responds to the call and says, if no one better is willing to go, then I will. And so at the age of 26, he makes the journey. It would have taken them over a month. There was no commercial airlines or anything like that there. And they would have to travel through, they'd dock at Calcutta, and they'd have to then get a train and then walk through the jungle to get there. The incredible thing is, he was set from the beginning. This has to be a truly Mizo church. We want to leave a church here for the Mizo people to lead and to take forward. And so when he arrived, there were only 45 Christians in 1901. By the time he left, 1921, there were 27,000 Christians in, and Mizoram continues to be the most Christian state in India. And in fact, my own personal connection is my nine and tide, my grandparents were born out in India on the mission field. Their parents, David and Muriel Edwards, and Samuel and Glenys Davis, were missionaries out there. So that's my family line as well. And we just had the immense privilege just this year of having a choir. They send, the Indian Presbyterian Church now send the choir over every couple of years to Wales to sing across the chapels and churches, and they sing. Oh, Gwynedd, there's no describing it. It's a heavenly sound. They came and they sung in the local high school here in Blaenau. There were teachers in tears, moved by their sound. And they sing Welsh hymns. They don't have a word of Welsh, but they know the hymns. And one of their songs, they sing, "Thank you, Wales, for all you've done for us." They see the gospel as the greatest gift. My nine's funeral, there were leaders from the Indian Presbyterian Church that came to that funeral, and in their heart language, in their Mizo language, shared through the tears their gratefulness for my family and for the Welsh people who'd taken and given them the greatest gift of all.
Amazing.
So, but again, D. Jones, Llandderfel, nowhere significant, and yet at the age of 26, God uses him powerfully.
I don't want to big up Wales. Okay, that's not the reason I'm going to say what I'm going to say now. But we have to acknowledge and we have to recognise the part that Wales has played in God's plan, really, and how God has blessed Wales with the likes of Anne Griffiths, whose hymns are still being sung 150, 200 years later. Robert Jermaine Thomas, who, foundational influence in South Korea. D.E. Jones, who you've just mentioned in India. For a very small country, God has used young people, not limited to young people, but young people to influence, globally. And so I don't want to sound as if I'm bragging about Wales, because I'm not, but I am trying to bring this understanding that how significant Wales has been in what God is doing, not just within Wales, but globally as well. And I think it's Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, forever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if he has been using young people in history, of the history of Wales, tell us about how he's using young people today. What's happening at the moment now amongst the youth in Wales?
Yeah. Well, that was exactly the point of my talk in the gathering in Hirwaun, was in why are we taking this time to mine our history? Is it because we just want a good reminisce and kind of nostalgia? It's not that, is it? It's exactly that, Gwynedd. It's the same God that called them and empowered them and went with them is the same God that does with us as well. And that God has great plans. And so in Hirwaun, we saw 60 young people there. And it's funny because we had a discussion as a team. Should we host this somewhere more accessible, convenience, larger? Should we be in a Cardiff or a Swansea or even a Bangor or whatever? Okay. And we said, no, we want to be in Hirwaun, because Hirwaun is one of these places that we're talking about. And we know our friends, and I know Alice Awad has already been on the podcast as well. I have a huge heart for Hirwaun and seeing a new work established there. And we said, no, we want young people to have to find a way. We want it to be almost difficult to get them, because we want those who are there to want to be in the room,
determined to be there.
Yeah. And so we brought a busload from Bala down with us. I met some students from Cardiff University who'd made the point of coming up. And again, I loved that because I know the student world can exist like a bubble. That was my experience in Manchester, really, that all that matters is these 3 years with these group of friends that I've got and nothing else. And I met these students, and you realize there's a hunger here for God, and not just to reach their fellow students, which is vital, but also that God has placed me here in Wales, and that he has purposes for me here for these 3 years, but perhaps even beyond as well. So I just love that those that were there were hungry, and the responsiveness, the willingness to say, yes, Lord, here I am, send me, was just incredible. And so that's what I'm blown away by at the moment, is just this hunger, this seriousness, this desire to be used by God. Literally just Sunday night gone, I was preaching over in Bala, my parents' church in Maes. They see regularly 20 to 25 young people attending their Sunday night gathering. Now that is mega church numbers for us here in Welsh-speaking Wales,
particularly in rural areas.
Rural areas, 100%. And they weren't sat at the back messing about or whatever, not wanting to be there. They were sat in the front rows, some of them even taking notes as I was preaching. I was blown away. Like, they want to know God, they want to experience him, and they want him to use them. The same kind of concerns of this world that I see my generation and perhaps generations above as well, where we've been sold a lie that the world says comfort is everything. You've got to make sure that you safety, pursue all of that, and then maybe do some stuff for God on the side. I'm seeing with this younger generation, there's a complete 180 on that they say, no, life is all about God, knowing him and making him known. It is literally one life, and it will soon pass. And so they realize we just want to live it for Jesus in every way. So that is within the church. And then what we see here in Blaenau, and I know we're not an isolated story here, but young people outside the church, obviously, they're not growing up in church anymore, and that's not part of the tradition and the culture of these younger generations now. Sunday school, youth clubs, there are very few of them running, especially in the towns and villages here in Wales. And so they're growing up without the Bible, but many call that a post-Christian generation. But I heard it said literally the other day, that isn't a post-Christian generation, that's a pre-revival generation.
I like that.
That's the sense we've had, is there's an openness, a willingness, a desire to want to explore more. Last night in our youth club, we see around 100 kids and young people come to our youth clubs on a Tuesday night. And I was doing a talk with the middle lots, the years 7 to 8, 11 to 13-year-olds, and asked the question very simply, do you ever wonder if there's more to life than this? And everyone in the room put their hands up. There's a hungering and a desire to know. And so we need to be reaching them, and we need to be discipling young people to see then others reached as well and raised.
Brilliant. Yeah. I was just thinking about, the mark of hunger for the gospel and for what's happening is not simply making notes in front of church, listening to you speaking, with all due respect to you, but it's also being willing to travel from Bala down to Hirwaun on a bus on the A470.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody who's done that, they will appreciate what I'm talking about, because that is no easy feat. But
we'd promised them on the way home, Gwynedd, a Burger King in Builth Wells, because it's the only place you can stop for food, and it was closed, so they didn't even get the joy of Burger King on the way home either. So they had to be serious. Yeah.
Excellent. Listen, there will be some youth, young people listening to this. Okay, they feel the stirring in their hearts. They're not yet connected, possibly, with the bigger picture of what God is doing in Wales. Okay, as far as the youth side of things is concerned. They weren't in Hirwaun, they couldn't come, or what would you say to that person, to that young person who is feeling that stirring? Yeah, God's leading me into something. I'm not really connected. Come on, give them some advice, Jos.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say to them is, if you feel that stirring, that hungering, calling, don't let others put a ceiling over your lives and for what God can do in and through you. And sadly, I have had some amazing older leaders and mentors pour into my life, and I'm so grateful for them. But also I've had voices that do say and do try and put a ceiling over your life, that say, look, I know, young people, you've got that desire to want to change the world, but the older you'll get, you find you can't really change the world. And I look back and I'm gutted, because I see those people, those examples, Robert Jermaine Thomas, Rosina Davis, D. Jones, and Griffiths. I see in those young people game changers, world changers, nation shapers, quite literally. Korea, India, we see South Wales valleys, North Wales reached because of these young people who were obedient and had the faith and the courage to step out. And so I want to say, don't let others put a ceiling over your lives. Instead, let others' ceilings be your floor. Go beyond that. There is so much more that God has for you. And I'll never forget it. When I was 15 years old, sold out in Bala, which has been a significant place, not just for me, but for many other leaders my age now, in terms of raising up a generation of leaders. I'm forever grateful for Andrew Ollerton. He's one of my mentors and has poured into my life, but he started Sold Out because he wanted to see a generation raised here in Wales of new leaders. And I was 15 years old. I remember being in my tears, feeling that call and burden for Wales. And what happened then was, the years that went by, I remember feeling the pull of the world. And I remember feeling like, because I remember being at that crossroads when you're 18, what am I going to do next? And I was like trying to pursue medicine at the time, because that's what my dad did. But then I just realized, I was like, am I pursuing that because that's what God is calling me to? Or am I pursuing it because I just want to live a comfortable life and try and earn as much money as I possibly can? I remember having a conversation with my dad, who is a GP. And I remember saying to him, I feel this burden and call to be involved in planting churches and reaching the lost. And yet I'm afraid, because I know I won't maybe be able to provide the same way you guys have provided for me and everything like that. And I'll never forget my dad just shaking his head and just being in disbelief that I was even in this wrestle. And he said, but Jos, you've got to realize that maybe you won't have the same resource or whatever. Maybe you won't go on the nice holidays the same way, but what you'll give your kids is so much greater. You'll give them an example of a dad who is willing to lay it all down for Jesus and his gospel. That is the greatest thing that you can give to them. So I want to encourage young people here, again, don't buy the lie that the world is trying to sell to you of comfort. Instead, just go after Jesus, seek first his kingdom, and then everything else, God will take care of the rest. And I know from our story that has been the case. So take the risk, step out, lay down your yes to God, and just follow that incredible adventure that he has for you.
Wonderful. And to those leaders of churches, they're leading a church or they're leading a youth group or whatever, what advice would you give to them in order to be able to encourage and equip this generation that we're talking about? What would you say to them, Jos? Because you are in that category yourself. You're leading, you're equipping, you're motivating, you're encouraging this generation that we're talking about. So go on, pass some of your wisdom and the things you've learned onto others who may not have it. Some already have, obviously, so no disrespect, but to those who are gleaning, what can they glean from you?
Well, definitely now the other side, I've got sympathy for church leaders and understand that there's so much demand and pressure in the role, and then the need to feel like we've got to be in control all the times as well. But I would say this: firstly, we cannot neglect ministry to kids and young people. In fact, it can't be it can't be an afterthought. It can't be a side project. It has to be central to the work that we do in investing. That's the first thing. We've got to invest. If we've got a generation that is serious about knowing God, and we've got to prioritize it and invest in discipleship, like raise the bar for young people. That's what they want. They want to delve deep into the Bible and into theology and understanding more of who our God is and the glorious gospel that he is, that he's given to us. And I see that in my parents. They're nearly 20 years into the role of running Coleg Abala, the Christian Youth Centre, owned by the Presbyterian Church. And they're nearly 20 years into this role, and they still, every Thursday night now, they have young people coming over to their house. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or big. In fact, young people aren't bothered by the production. What they're bothered about is relationship and authenticity. And what my parents do, they open up their home, they feed these young people, and then they go and they look at the Bible together. And it's through that. That's why they're turning up to church on Sunday nights. That's why then they're taking a lead. That's why they're starting a Christian union in school. And then it's because of that, because my parents are investing in them and then empowering them. And that's the second thing I'd say to church leaders. You've got to relinquish control in some ways as well. You've got to release young people to lead and to try and to fail, and then help them and mentor them along the way. Sold Out, I've already mentioned this work. They have been instrumental in my life. Andrew Ollerton, Meryl as well, who leads the work now. They gave me opportunities way before I was ready to lead. They gave me opportunities knowing I was going to mess up and not do the best job of it. But it's through that then you learn what your gifts are. It's through that then you can grow and learn and develop all that God has given to you. So you've got to release them and let them fail, but through that then pick them up and say, keep going. I see something in you. God is going to fan it into flame. And then the last thing I'd say, pray. Gosh, be on your knees for this generation. I think the best example of that recently has been the awakening, the outpouring in Asbury back in January 2023. Now, people see it as a revival for Gen Z. It very well might have been that. It was an ordinary chapel service that a few young people lingered after the service closed, and they didn't leave. And others joined. The Spirit of God fell, and there was 2 weeks of continuous 16 days of prayer and worship. And now we see that as a revival for Gen Z, yes. But what we don't see is the years of travailing prayer that the older leaders in Asbury were pouring themselves out to God and asking for him to move in this generation. And he did. He responded after years of tears being sown into this work. And when it happened, when the Spirit of God fell, they weren't the ones, these older leaders, they weren't the ones up the front getting all the glory and leading this thing. In fact, they were releasing the students, the Gen Zers, to be ministering to the Gen Zers, but they were stewarding it all behind the scenes. They were ensuring that these young people looked after. They were ensuring that they were consecrated, that the right people were there leading from the front, but they never once were up there preaching. Instead, they were behind the scenes, continually praying, continually investing in these young people. And we're so privileged that on the 1st of March, David Thomas, who was one of those leaders, is coming and sharing in that Day for Wales that Canty Gymru is organising. That he's going to share some of that story. So I'd say, church leaders, get to that day to learn and hear more from David, and also young people, get to that day. We want to fill the showground in Billthwells. There's 1,000 seats that need filling, and I'd love to see an incredible percentage of those seats be in the under 25 generation.
Jos, excellent, brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. This is the second time we've done this interview. We did it in Welsh and we did it in English, and it's just as encouraging and inspiring second time round. So I'm really grateful to you. Thanks for taking the time, because I know you've got 2 young girls, you've got a wife, you've got a youth club, you've got all this, you've got a church, you've got all this, and yet you made time for this. So I'm really, really grateful to you, Jos. Okay.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it won't be the last time we see you. So, yeah. But for now, listen, God bless you. Okay? Bye-bye.
Diolch.
Croeso. Ta-ra. Bendith.